many locked and private collections of books at the main branch, and she'd had keys for some of them, but one day at the main desk, she'd picked up the wrong set of keys by accident. At least she'd told herself it was an accident. She had then proceeded to try a few doors that had been closed to her. Behind one of them, in a collection of European popular incunabula, she had discovered a book of woodcuts depicting sexual positions and concepts she'd not dreamed existed. They were crude in comparison to better works of both the period and the subject, but they touched a chord deep in Alice Melvin. On that sunny September day, deep in the stacks where no sunlight ever reaches, Alice Melvin was reshelving books, working her cart slowly along the aisles near the card catalog. As she turned over each title, checking the numbers on the spine, she failed to notice the vaguest hint of an odor in the air, a sickly sweetness that seemed to waft at right angles to her path, drifting toward the endless rows of card files. Alice's mind was only half on her job. Part of her attention was fixed on the books themselves, her titles, the aesthetic effect on her imagination. When the first of the card catalog drawers began to slide soundlessly open, her mind was miles away, traveling hopefully through a series of renderings on Hellenic pottery themes. Alice had just discovered a truly provocative illustration when something landed in front of her on the card. It was a catalog card. Had it fallen from an upper shelf, or was it the work of some prankster? She turned angrily, then froze. Dozens of drawers had opened in the long line of cabinets, and millions of carefully indexed cards were shooting into the air, caroming off the stacks and settling and swirling in great blizzards to the floor. As she watched in horror, more drawers began to open, more cards exploded into the air. Alice Melvin's jaw worked convulsively. She turned and ran. Not pranksters, her mind supplied. Definitely not pranksters. At the end of the row, she halted to catch her breath. Report, she realized. I must report this to someone. Carefully, tensely, she tiptoed down a parallel aisle, heading for the stairwell to the floor above, yet keeping as far from the card catalog as possible. Through the rank book, she could still hear cards spewing into the air. Little piles had even drifted into the intersections, and she hurried past them, lest one of them reach out and grab her by the ankle. As she made her way along the last group of stacks, something crashed to the floor behind her, and she leapt into the air. "Oh, I'm too young to have a heart attack," she thought. She turned and saw a large book lying in the aisle. Another was wobbling on a shelf to her right, and as she watched, a third launched itself into the air and drifted across the space, neatly reshelving itself on the other stack. Then another, and suddenly dozens of books were in motion, crossing back and forth across the aisle like rush-hour pedestrians. It was too much for her. "No," she cried. "I won't do it again, I promise. I'll never look at another dirty picture." And at that instant she turned the final corner and came face to face with the thing. They heard her scream all over the building. Chapter 2. There are worse occupations in this world than feeling a woman's pulse. Lawrence Stern. Dr. Peter Venkman loved his work. He often said it to himself in precisely those words. I love my work. I'm not always quite sure what it is, but I do love it. I love getting up in the morning. I love coming down to my lab in the basement of Weaver Hall. And I love getting paid by Columbia University for doing whatever it is that I do. In fact, he often considered that a large part of what he did, perhaps the major part, consisted of just that, the search for identity, for purpose, for the meaning of just what it was that he did do. God, I love psychology. It's so wonderfully formless. You can get away with anything. He smiled warmly at his two subjects. Scott, Jennifer, are we ready? Jennifer favored him with a coy look and a quick, anxious breath that made her breast rise and fall. She was convinced that Peter Venkman was a genius, or she soon would be. God, I love teaching, Venkman decided. He turned to Scott. Okay, partner? Scott Dickinson nodded nervously, his mouth pumping away on a quid of gum. He smiled crookedly at Jennifer, who froze him right out. Venkman pulled a card out of the Zener deck and held it up. All right, what is it? Scott set his jaw and concentrated, but Venkman could tell that part of his attention was on the copper cuff strapped to his wrist, its wires running to the control box on Venkman's side of the table. A square? Good guess, Venkman replied, but no. He turned the card over. It was a star. Nice try. He pushed a button, sending a mild shock through the boy. Dickinson twitched, but smiled gamely. The next card was a circle. Okay.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.